I guess I could just talk about like what has transpired over the last week with me as far as like study and reading and listening and blah blah blah, that sort of thing.
Cool. Sounds good.
I think, well, I did give myself a little bit of homework last time, and that was to mess around with something in Ableton, like create some sort of thing in there.
Yes, you did.
And I did set about doing it, and I've done some of it. And I didn't exactly hit a dead end. I hit this sounded like a really great idea on paper, but I'm not sure that it's going to help.
Remind me of what you promised and let us know where you
I
got
was
it.
talking about like writing out various scales and like playing them on um, a piano plugin. Like I use a Contact from Native Instruments or whatever. I like their stuff. And then messing around with things like programming all the chords in a major scale, and then programming all the chords in a minor scale, and then maybe exploring the modes and things like that, and doing the same thing with chords and whatnot. Um, and I've been doing that along with reading the 20th Century Harmony book, which now I'm halfway through the book. Like the book's like 300 pages, I think. Yeah, just shy of 300 pages. So I'm
Show the
about
cover.
what's that?
Show me the cover. Okay, yeah, I remember that one. Yep,
Yeah,
sure.
that's the one that Adam Neely was talking about.
Yeah.
I felt like I started like a little bit later because I was interested in stuff that was later on in the book, but I felt like I also kind of liked the guy's writing style, so I went back to page one and just decided I was going to try to read the whole thing. So I'm about halfway through, and man, there's like super technical discussions of stuff, and I think we talked about that last time. I think I benefit from some of that. Do I benefit from all of it? I don't know. Like he discusses creating scales. So instead of saying that like these are all the major scales, these are all the scales in the various modes and blah blah blah, he talks about constructing scales as well. Like there are a couple in there that I hadn't heard of, like the super Locrian, and then some other like I guess we've heard of, or maybe some people have heard of like Hungarian minor. That's one that people use a bunch. There's some like Asian flavored scales and whatnot, and some of that stuff is covered in there too. But we were talking about like mathy sort of pattern kinds of things last time too. We've mentioned it at least, and he kind of does that with scales. He's like, okay, here's the major scale, and that's the most basic thing, the most basic pattern, and the modes come from just shifting that pattern around or start putting your one at the beginning of uh, putting your one at the various notes in the scale. Those develop the 6 or 7 modes. And then he talked about like constructing scales, like, hey, suppose we wanted to do one where we like between the first and second note we did 3 half steps, and then the second and third note we did 1 half step, and go all the way up until we come back around to the one that we started with. Like he talked about those kinds of things, and that's kind of mathy pattern sorts of things. He talked about scale constructions that like take 2 octaves to resolve to come back to the tonic that we started with, and also I think there were a couple where that took 3 octaves to come around. Super interesting. I mean that's it seems academic maybe, and for me I definitely have a bit of me that like enjoys that sort of thing. And I think that we see those kinds of things, whether it's like string theory or something, right? In the math and physics world, it's like, well, okay, or bending space time and blah blah blah. Same sorts of things that we are still exploring that started out as academic questions or academic propositions. I think this is sort of the same thing that appeals to me. Will I ever use it? I have no idea. But he discusses all kinds of things, like constructing the various like chords based on thirds, chords based on fourths, chords based on fifths, and how these things like turn around and do interesting things. And I thought that it would be interesting maybe for my ear to like just like write those things out in Ableton and just have it like loop around for a little while and see if I could like listen to things or whatever. And one thing that he talks about in chord construction and chord progression construction is about how for certain notes or certain parts of the major scale, like we talked about, and I kind of even joked about, like, why call it a perfect fourth if it's like it's questionable. And his whole thing is like, well, the perfect fourth is like totally context dependent in the passage or whatever that you're listening to. And I actually found that idea, I think, extended to just like listening to scales overall. It's like, okay, I could, whatever, I could sit and just count numbers, right, as a math person or whatever, but until those numbers are in context or like have some connection to the real world or whatever, like we could know all the stuff about, we could name Fibonacci numbers all day, but until we do things like divide the second one by the first one and take a limit and blah 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 and see that we're getting closer to the golden ratio, yada yada yada, all that sort of stuff. So there's a bunch of that where I'm like, okay, I'm listening to these scales and I'm going, well, okay, I see that some of them have an interesting flavor. But the nice thing about it too is that with something like Ableton, I can share the session or whatever. I'll clean it up and make it consumable. I thought I was going to write all the scales from like C sharp, like do all 12 scales and then their variations, but I'm not sure that that is benefiting me at all. Um, at this point, I may turn around in a week and go, oh, I totally get it. But the things that I did find I was able to do was like, so each channel, like if you think of a mixer, like each channel had a different mode of the scale on it. And then I was able to use the mute and solo buttons to play like two scales together. Then I did other things like, oh, well, maybe this scale needs the context of the one chord underneath it, like the tonic chord underneath it at all times, to kind of give that reference and to give that context. So actually, some ideas, certainly that have been, I guess, largely turned on to by this book, are starting to congeal a little bit, and I'm starting to see how bits of the puzzle like fit together. And again, like I'm going at this almost totally randomly. I took a couple suggestions from some YouTubers that I like, and you and I have talked about it, and we've tried to do it by feel and by ear and blah blah blah, all those approaches. Um, yeah, and there's this kind of very like academic approach to this, and that I think that that's added like a little thing. So I was able to play like two scales together and see that they jive. Like there were two or three that like with the major scale, one or two of the modes like jived with it, which to me like unlocks the mystery of like, okay, I'm listening to a song that I never, ever, never get tired of, Hangar 18, Megadeth, never get tired of it. Like to me, that's like a pinnacle of like twin and trading like guitar solos. Like, okay, and I know a guy like Marty Friedman and probably Dave is like very technical. And it's like, oh well, I'm going to alternate, soloing in these modes over the riff, right? You know,
Yeah.
my friend Scott, who has produced the last Great Falls record and likely will do the next one. I think he calls that like the section or the part, like where it's just solos to the end of the song kind of thing. He's into it at that kind of nerd level as well. And yeah, like I would like to just sit down and go, oh, look at that. He's like cycling through these like modes or whatever. And I feel like at this point I have the facility to like sit with the sheet music rather than the tab and maybe check that sort of thing out. But for what, I'm not sure. Maybe just to satisfy my curiosity somewhat. But I am curious about like such things for sure.
I've done something similar to that when I was really interested in ear training at one point, and I learned about what perfect pitch really was, and was told, it's really hard to develop as an adult. And it's like, I can, let me try to, over technify this or something, like, let me try to figure out how I can beat the system. Yep. And so I ended up like writing Logic or whatever DAW I was using at the time, these like 30-minute long pieces where I would just loop one note and droning in it, and I over top of it, I was C, then we'd move on like G, like as this like kind of like did this like new agey / technical approach, and I tried to sleep with it. Like I tried to actually let it,
I've done that
like
too.
come into my subconscious.
Totally.
But it didn't really work for that, and I'm wondering how much benefit's going to have for this too, because it does seem like you want to like. It would be great if you could just let your subconscious like soak it in, but you have to know your subconscious well enough to like know how to how to get through to it, and that's something difficult. Maybe it's something you can't do, or something you have to luck into. But it's worth trying. That's all. I mean, I can say it's definitely worth trying. I don't know if it's going to work out, but it's worth trying.
Yeah, and the interesting thing, or I feel like the unknowable thing about the subconscious learning is like, well, did it actually work? You're like, at some point, you've studied something so much that you're like, well, yeah, I'm also studying an awful lot, but like, what role did the subconscious part play? For sure. I mean,
And
like,
how deep does it go too? Like,
yeah,
I know that I used to do this at RPI. I would like just crib for a test, and I would sort of do what you're doing. I would get everything down on a piece of paper, like a crib sheet. Sometimes they'd give you a rule, like you could take one sheet of paper in with you.
right, totally.
And so I would like write everything, the whole darn textbook on thing. And by the time I did that, I will have learned everything. And I never really
Yeah,
looked at the crib sheet while I was doing
yeah,
the test.
yeah.
On the flip side, the week after the test, I also didn't really retain a lot of that information. And it was kind of like just put in short-term memory.
Yeah, sure. And that's like an experience I think everybody who's like crammed has had. Like, cramming is a different thing than studying. It's like, yeah,
Yeah, definitely.
it's totally short-term memory that gets immediately erased, which is interesting. Yeah, like if I've done tours or shows like for hire, and they give me the set list, yeah, definitely, you can bet that I'm like listening to that thing's playing in the background while I'm sleeping at some
Mm.
level, and that I feel like that definitely has helped. Again, I don't know if I can access how much it has helped or had helped in the past, but I know that I've actually been able to play the songs correctly and kind of impress, which is quite nice. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if like listening to C the notes C for 8 hours. That's incredible.
It didn't work, I'll tell you that much.
Oh my gosh, that's super interesting. Yeah, so I don't and I don't feel like I want to listen to, to scale the modes through from the one all the way through the seven modes. No way. That I don't think that
Yeah.
would work for me. It's not appealing to me when I know I could listen to something that maybe would support my sleep a little bit better, like some whatever alpha brainwaves kind of thing.
Yeah. The way you describe that book is it kind of reminds me of a lot of the books I've tried to read on the subject. Um, in that they want to explain something to you, and they have all these good rules about music, and they explain the rules of music pretty well, but it's kind of out of context. It reminds me of like how everybody says, like when they're taking calculus in high school, and they're like, when am I ever going to need this in the real world? And you tell them, well, actually, if the teacher would have explained it in terms of like, let's say you were a farmer and you had this much land and you know it was going to take this much time for stuff to grow, and how are you going to determine what your final yield will be? This is why calculus was developed, so you could do problems like this, real world problems. It's definitely not a fake, just a thing for high school students to spend their time with. It's based on something true need for such a math, and I don't. But they teach it in a way that you don't really get that, and sometimes I feel that way about these harmony books, and that they're teaching you stuff that it's hard to grasp, like why what they're telling you is important. I'd almost rather see a harmony book that was like, here's what we think like ancient people first got their first harmony. First thing they noticed was octaves, and they felt really good. They could hear when they could sing along to or they could hum. They would. I don't know what it would do. They would grunt along to other people. The women and men could do it together, even though they had different ranges,
uh,
and they found the octave that way. And then kind of lead you through like how was the third discovered, and how did they what was the first way that like sadness was delivered through this minor uh, triad?
yeah,
And to me, it could be more compelling. I don't know. Maybe that's too hard. Maybe it's too speculative. But even if it was a work of fiction that gave me a good story, kind of like Star Wars teaches religion to some people,
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah,
it's
totally.
it's a way better religion than most on Earth, and it's a totally fictional story. So is the rest, but for that matter, but um, it's just a better story, and I'd like to hear a better story about how we can think about music being developed.
Yeah, I mean, it's on my list, and it could be one of those things whose job is to just live on my list forever. Is to kind of do some like reading about like the Pythagoreans, right? That stuff's pretty known. Like there's stories about that group. Some call it a cult. I don't know, but like that know that like, oh, a perfect fifth is 3 to 2 or 2 to 3 or whatever in terms of like the frequencies and how harmonic and sort of mathy it is. Yeah, at some point, and it's like it's kind of a curiosity in my mind, and yeah, that's interesting that you mentioned that. So I'm wondering how much of that known story like covers the sort of thing you're talking about. That's
I'd like to know for
yeah.
sure. Again, I think I said this last week, but the people who obsess over, well, I have a good friend who's obsessed over microtonality, and he really digs all the ratios and like learns them, and he's a super intelligent guy, and he really embraces it. But the thing that sets him apart from most of those mathy guys is his music is actually also really compelling.
Yeah.
So I feel like he must be getting something out of the math too, or he's feeling it and augmenting that natural
Yeah.
musical ability with the math. While the other people are just like, well, this should sound good. It's like a computer trying to compose. It's gonna maybe be mathematically accurate and harmonious, but it doesn't have any feeling,
Oh.
emotion, soul. There you go.
Yeah, totally. And that's interesting that you mentioned that because one of my interests musically and probably artistically and otherwise is like just using generative techniques to come up with stuff. Like that's certainly, and actually one of the unfinished bits on my hard drive musically is like something where I'm using like generative techniques where I have a handful of like chords or like maybe a four measure passage that Ableton is like playing sort of randomly, and I've definitely used randomness in that way, but it's like it's kind of a randomness with a context or randomness with a boundary. Like, yeah, a pure random thing is going to mostly produce garbage in the way that it doesn't have soul or you can't follow it or whatever. But this kind of thing definitely worked, and I picked out a couple ideas um, there. And I also just like try to throw some sounds together, whether they're tonal or not. Like I do it with rhythms too, and then just record and see what the computer just like spits out. And I just
Yeah.
grab the if it can spit out MIDI and audio, I'll grab both and then see what I could do with them. But if not, I'll just take the audio and chop it up and do something with it for sure. I mean, I love that sort of like loop based paradigm for doing stuff. I mean,
I
yeah.
don't know if you've ever seen the meme, but there's like a synth magazine cover. It's like Synth Weekly or Synth Monthly, and it has all the stories that are in that magazine are written on the cover, like in a regular magazine. They're all fake stories. One of them is randomness: why it's better than talent.
Yeah.
Yeah, randomness is always something that I've fought to avoid. I always feel like there needs to be a reason for something, but on the other hand, for some things where I don't really understand it, I actually appreciate the randomness. Like if you give me a drum loop and you throw some randomness in it, and then
Yeah.
repeat the randomness,
Yeah.
you can randomly happen upon something that's cool and
Yeah.
forces you into a different place.
Yeah.
I don't like the drum sequencers that have a drum random on one of the steps. It has like a randomness or a random outcome of whether how loud it'll be. Sometimes I feel like that's just phoning it in, but
Yeah, I mean those kinds of things are largely an attempt, maybe a phoning it in attempt. Like there's a big thing, especially with drumming, about like humanizing a loop or
yeah,
humanizing a thing. And it's like, yeah, you know how you humanize it? Get a fucking human to play it. Done. Like it's just we ain't there, man. It's like, and even if we are there, like who wants to be there? Like I would rather hear a person doing it. But I mean, some things, I mean, whatever. Like those James Brown's drummers loops that form almost the entirety of like the early like Public Enemy catalog. Like, yeah, you want to hear
yeah,
those over and over. They're great, and they're totally human. The part that's not is the part where it's chopped up and put
right,
against each other. But who cares? Or the Amen break, right? The thing that is the entirety of jungle and drum and bass. Like that's it. Like
yeah,
super cool. And there's like Gosh, what's his name? There's a drummer who does it like super well. What the heck is his name? Why am I drawing a blank? I have his videos. It'll come to me. But he like actually chopped it up like a computer, learned all the bits, and then learned how to shuffle the bits himself with adding a humanized sort of touch. Like it's super great. I mean, it's very niche, but like it's super interesting. Why am I drawing a blank on dude's name? It's so weird. I'll think of it.
What's the name of the break? It's called something. It's called
The Amen break because
the
it's
Amen
from
break. Okay.
yeah, it comes from a song called Amen Brother by this band called the Winstons. I actually have the 45 of it. I found it like in a weird like Golden Oldies Records or something. I was like, whoa, they actually have this, and I actually have a copy of it. It's quite nice. There's a great short like little documentary about it. Well, we'll provide a link to it. It's really good about how it gets sampled and who famously did it early on, and like how it gained traction. Is like it created a whole genre of music.
That documentary starts with the 45 being played, doesn't it?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
quite good. I'm sure you've seen it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that sort of thing. And the guy who did it like is really, really into it and kind of an archivist in that sort of way. And I mean, there's a great academic treatment of something that we've been feeling for like years and years and years. And yeah, kids with backpacks and headphones at shows have been doing it for a couple decades now, more than a couple. Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely feels like both days we've done this so far, we've come back to looking at rhythm with a very sense of longing. Like, oh man, this is how it feels right, and you just know it when you feel it with rhythm, and it's not coming through with the music theory that same way. Like, I wish I could be like this, or like, it's just not. Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it could be that there's like a lifelong drummer as part of this discussion that it comes up, and a drum nerd. Like, yeah, symbols just arriving in the mail all the time for me. But so that's interesting. So as I thumb ahead in the 20th Century Harmony book, there's a section on rhythm, and I'm actually really curious because I'm a drummer, and I like to hear or think about maybe what non-drummers' takes on rhythm are. And I'm actually curious because as I said, I've been enjoying reading this guy's like super technical take on harmony and notes and stuff that works and stuff that doesn't, and how to construct things is like super cool. I'm interested in what his take on rhythm is because
Yeah.
I mean, I'm assuming this guy's pretty well rounded, so I don't think I'll see like a whoa, that's a totally foreign concept about thinking about rhythm. Like, whoa, what about the 2 and the 4, dude? Like, what? I mean, although this is like very classical music focused and
Yeah.
probably symphonic sorts of writing, but I'm curious about that just to see. And actually, a bunch of the books that I have, they all have this section on like, okay, and now the rhythm thing. It's like, all right, I guess. I mean, it could be about accenting things. It could be about crescendos and stuff like that, but I actually have no idea. So I think
I
that,
hope I secretly hope that you lose all respect for the guy. That he completely drops the ball on the rhythm stuff. And you're like, I can't believe I listened to anything else he said when he got this so wrong.
yeah, seriously, like he's gonna drop the like no cellist, no orchestra sort of like band, like no drummer, no band. It's like no, I'm sorry, I have no idea. We'll see. But yeah, a handful of the books that I have like have all of that stuff, and then there's a part about rhythm. Like, oh, these are all the chord progressions, and now let's talk about rhythm. It's like, all right, I guess let's see what happens. I have no idea. I mean, I know, I know it's like also a lifelong like guitar fan when the guitarist is like strumming up and down like this nonstop and you're not playing grindcore. It's a yellow light, danger ahead for me.
In what way?
um it's overly funky when somebody's
Oh, I
playing
see.
that way. I'm just like, oh god, it seems like a trope to me, and it's just not my bag. Like
I gotcha.
I like riffs an awful lot, and that sort of waka chicka waka waka stuff is not my deal. I mean, Nile Rodgers has his place for sure. He invented a lot of stuff, but not
Yeah,
my go-to. I mean, I'll listen to those records for sure. But yeah, like it gets very spearhead up in here when the guitar player is doing that. It's just not my thing.
I see. Yeah. I think part this when you mentioned like how you're a lifelong drummer, and that's why maybe we're going this way. But I'm also a lifelong lover of things I can't do. So drums, I've got drum set behind me here. I've been practicing for 20 years or
What do you
something.
use the computer monitor for? That appears to be hooked up to the drums.
Um, well, the old Rock Band and Guitar Hero games, they have drum tracks on there.
Uh-huh.
And so instead of playing the plastic drums, you can follow along with the drums. You can actually hook a real MIDI drum set up to
No
these games
kidding.
and play along.
Whoa. Okay.
And man, that is a discussion to have one day. I don't know if it's today's day,
Wow.
but
Okay.
it's have you ever know about Guitar Hero and Rock Band, how they look or anything like
Yeah,
that?
totally. Totally.
Okay, so there's this. I'll just explain it again. The 3D lines and circles that fly at you, and you have to hit them as they hit a moment of that's the now moment. So as they come through, you have to be hitting these things. And so with drums, it's got like snares, a red symbol, as a red circle on the left that's flying at you. All this, there's a yellow symbol and like a blue tom tom, and then there's a line that goes through all of them. And that would be a kick.
Yeah.
And so I've spent so many hours playing the drums because I feel like they're pretty close. Like when you play a plastic guitar, it's nothing like the guitar. And I know drummers would come to this and say, that's nothing like the real drums either. But for me, it's a lot closer to the real drums than anything else. And so I kind of now I have really good limb independence thanks to this. But I am like no better at playing drums without the game. Like, I have no real sense for like, I went to a good drum teacher and like, he's like trying to teach me Back in Black or sing songs that are supposed to be simple. And it always like in drums to me, it seems like, it can be as simple as you may think it's so simple, but then it's going to be one part of the song where the drummer says, "Oh, by the way, I'm a pro."
Yeah.
And he does something that's really hard. And then as a beginner, you're like, "Oh, well, I totally can't do that." So I think in Back in Black, there's all that, that kind of stutter, pushing the beat. I don't know what it was called, but just something in there that made it very difficult for me. But
the drums were difficult in Back in Black, is what you're saying.
Yes.
Oh yeah. Okay.
No, the guitar's no problem for me, but the drums are just basically any song that's not just a song out of Mel Bay that teaches you some thing. As any real rock song is going to come through. Even like you think like Poison, what a terrible band. Their songs have a section in each of them that is difficult for me to play or impossible for me to play. So you probably have no problem with it, but I do have problems with it. So, but I guess what I was saying is that like I have this real respect for drums, and I also for that like Waka Waka guitar thing.
Yeah,
there's a certain section of like Duran Duran songs that turned me on to that sound, and so those were always, or again, they were kind of the hard part of the song for me to play, and I actually like that kind of style of guitar quite a bit. So
those guys rule. They still sound good to me, man. Like I liked it back in the day, and I still do. Those guys still sound good to me, man.
Okay, but they do have that funky guitar at points.
They do. I mean, it's and that like weird, like, I mean, it's 80s, right? It's like that weird, like phasey guitar that he's always playing. Like it's like, all right, but I mean, it's the thing, totally. Or just like when I listen to old metal records, it's like, dude, so much reverb, so not heavy. Like, what the hell? It's pretty, like too much. So did you like meet Lars Ulrich and tell him that like shortest straw was like yellow, green, green, blue, yellow, blue, red, green, yellow, green?
This is probably the first public place I've ever admitted to even playing these games.
Careful what you have in the background of your video conference. I have a friend who, like, every time I send him a photo of like, oh, here's what I'm doing with like fucking modular synth or this or that or the other thing, the point of the photo that I send him is never that. It's to like blow up what's going on in the background. He's like, wow, what do you need all those calculus books for in the background? Like, oh nice. Man, it's the best. Yeah, super funny. But it's interesting that you said that you feel like your limbs are more independent now that you've actually practiced the Guitar Hero drums.
Very much, yeah.
To me, as a lifelong drummer, independence is like one of the most difficult things. And I was just having this conversation with Shane, who plays bass in Great Falls. He like will just send me like a random bit of trivia because he's a professional writer, journalist, and whatever. And I'll read it to you. He sent this to me. It says, the song was recorded in just 2 takes in 1 session. Drummer Mickey Waller often arrived at recording sessions with the expectation that a drum kit would be provided. And for Maggie May, the Rod Stewart song, it was, except that no cymbals could be found. The cymbal crashes had to be overdubbed separately some days later, which is wild to me. Like I'm just incredulous at like that kind of thing. Today, like techie sorts of metal things, like I don't know, a band like Dragon Force or something, which is not my bag. But they do things like record just the toms and then just the snare and the kick and then just the cymbals in a separate take. I'm just like, oh, dude, that's not independence, like that kind of thing. It's like there's a thing about all of the stuff being done at the same time and also all of the stuff bleeding over into the microphones, all that kind of stuff that like to me and to my ears, like, yeah, that's what a drumming like performance is, right?
Yeah.
Maybe a guy who's as good as Matt Cameron, the Soundgarden guy, now Pearl Jam guy, one of my favorite drummers who is has made amazing records and does amazing things. Maybe that guy could pull off recording each drum in a separate take and then making it sound good. But dude, there's no way. But I mean, it's Maggie May, the song that we've heard a million times and sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't listened to it since, but I was just having that discussion of like, whoa, I couldn't isolate one of my limbs for one of the takes. There's no way.
So you mentioned the Amen break or the Amen break documentary. There's another short documentary about the song Heart of Glass by Blondie.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, and that is another track in which he basically had to do all the drums a couple different times. They have a drum loop, a sequencer that they were playing to, and then some of the drums are real, and so they had to do all that, and that was partially because of the technology at the time. Just they just needed to do it that way, and it ended up with some kind of cool effects with that song.
The guy's drums sound so good on that track, man. They're just like real like 70, right? That's late 70s or is it early 80s?
Right around there, yeah. I'm not sure for that one.
Yeah, I'd like specifically always remember thinking that snare drum sounds really good on it. Like he does those like snare drum fills that sound so good. And then toward the end, as it escalates, there's snare and tom fills and they sound awesome. I could like hear them in my head. They're so good. Yeah.
So I don't know that my limb independence would allow me to play just my foot part separate from my hand part. I'm just saying like I was very chunky and very awkward with my hands playing everything at once.
Yeah.
This makes and I've done other very weird things with this. I would finish the game and I would still suck at drums. So I would say, well, there must be something more I can do. So I would like, let's play it left-handed. And left-footed. And so then I actually, now I play it where I don't use the snare with my hand. I actually trigger the snare with my left foot.
Okay.
So I do the whole Rick Allen thing. Actually, my user is called Rick Allen on the PlayStation for that. And what I was able to do with that is when like Christine, my wife, sings and I play guitar, I actually play the drums with my feet.
Oh, okay, yeah.
At the same, so like one-man band type thing. So I mean, it's paid off. But I tell you one thing: those 3D notes coming flying at me, I would have paid in retrospect. In hindsight, it's 2020, but I would have easily given them, I don't know, $5,000, $10,000 to have just given me the music notation for the songs, so that I could have learned music notation along the way instead of learning the useless skill of being able to play a 3D barrage of notes flying at me.
Yeah, I guess for drum set music or drum kit music, it's not much different actually. Like generally things like the hi-hat and the ride cymbal are on the top and the snare and kick are somewhere in the middle, but sometimes you don't even use a full staff. It's actually kind of accurate to what to what it
Yeah,
is when you write it
but
down.
it's not flying at you at 3D. Like I'd rather just see
Oh,
a static presentation, even if it was like horizontally
oh, it's
scrolling
gonna.
instead of
Oh, okay.
vertically.
So I guess I've never played the game. So the notes are flying from inside the screen in a at a
Point,
yeah,
vanishing
point.
point.
Yeah, vanishing point. That's what I'm trying to think. Yeah, okay. So they're flying at you that way. So time is going in and out of the screen instead of across like music does.
Basically, yeah. It's
Oh,
like you're
okay.
driving a road
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
it's coming
Oh, I can
underneath you.
see. Oh, I can get with that then. Okay, I can see why that would be difficult. Oh, interesting. Yeah, I've
I
never
mean,
done
it's probably easier than reading music, but seeing how much time I spent, I would have actually been able to like nowadays pick up any drum sheet music probably and like be able to hear it in my mind rather than now I don't have that
yeah,
skill. And it would have been something I would have paid for and I would have been happy to have.
yeah. Yeah,
Um,
that's the other thing that's about the harmony book is that there's tons of like little examples, and I can only like look at them and know and locate the notes. Like, and they're only like 3 or 4 bar explanations of like, oh, you see how strong this sounds. It's a seventh chord, but the root is played in the left hand on a piano, or it's played in the basses in an orchestra. I can see how the inversions actually affect the weightiness of something, which is that's totally information I'm after. Like that sounds really good. But yeah, there's like these 3 or 4 measure things where I can only technically just locate the notes, like no locating points on a graph and going, oh yeah, that's the graph of y equals x squared, of course, or whatever. Like same sort of thing. But do I actually have a notion of what these things like sound like? No, I have his text description and then I have a visual. Like another thing that crossed my mind was like, oh man, I'll just like program all of the like 4 measure 4 measure examples and notate them and like put them in like a grid in Ableton. I was like, that will take me 5 years. It'll be pretty ridiculous.
right.
I'd like to, but not right now.
Actually, that just makes me think of how we can wrap all these things we've been talking of together in a way with music theory is that, um, playing these games, playing the rhythm games,
Mm-hmm.
it was teaching me about rhythm kind of behind the scenes. Like the game was the central focus and like allowed me to perhaps like access like my inner child and like approach these things with like fun and rather than like reading about them in a textbook.
Yeah.
um, I've long felt like music theory is the kind of thing you need to get through something fun. Like if you're able to like love a piece of music and you have done ear training
Uh-huh.
and to learn that piece of music, that's a compelling way. Like that's a fun way to do ear training. If you're just doing drills, somebody playing 2 notes on a piano or something, that's really boring. I feel like if you're learning about music theory just by reading a book, you're not accessing the part of your brain that will really benefit and take in that information.
Right.
Like transcribing it into something like into your DAW, using it in a piece of music, talking about it with your friends on a
Yeah.
podcast. Like this is the kind of thing that's going to make it stick.
Yeah.
So that's one of the reasons I'm glad we're doing this and like talking about these somewhat seemingly random things, but they do come
Yeah. They
together in a
all.
way.
I mean, it's a little piece of everything, and that's really the thing is like when we witness somebody who's really good at something, we witness, you know, whatever it is that catches our eye, and then we actually really learn about all of these like super subtle things that all like contributed to that kind of stuff. It's like, there's tons of examples, like, right, Steve Vai is known as like a shred guitar player, but I mean he really got his start by he got his job with Frank Zappa by being his transcription guy, like, and
Right.
taking things mostly by ear and transcribing them and like,
And doing a lot of drum transcription. It
yeah,
wasn't
dude.
just guitar.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that stuff is rhythmically complex, and you're like, oh, okay, so a guy like that has these things that underpin his just, when David Lee Roth is jumping around in Shaft riding a inflatable microphone in that one video that I'm sure we'll have to put a link to. They're like, yeah, and Steve Vai's like, yeah, but I also like, I know all this other shit. I just got done playing with Frank Zappa. This is so weird. But I mean, even the drummer in that band, Greg Bissonette, he's known as like a big band drummer. Like I was like, what is this dude doing in there? Like I remember
Uh,
seeing like books by him or like in the early days of learning things by video, there were videos about jazz drumming by that guy. I was like, that guy, like, so weird. And he's he's still around doing, like, if you watch like Drumeo, the drum channel or whatever, there's some cool, interesting
You make
things.
it sound like David Lee Roth is very many steps removed from big band music, and I don't know that I believe that. This is
Well, I mean,
just a gigolo guy.
totally, exactly. He did that. He did That's Life. He did something else. Yeah, he did a bunch of like big band-ish stuff. And I wonder how much those other guys had to do with it. It's super interesting. Or like Billy Sheehan, right? That guy is still around doing something.
Yeah.
Fine. I definitely do not listen to that stuff anymore. I actually still listen to Steve Vai, I think, but yeah, not often. I don't know. But yeah, that's the thing. It's like when people talk about, oh, like I have this meditation practice. It's like, well, what does that have to do with music? It's like a lot in terms of the discipline part or the mindfulness part and all of that sort of thing. I did get a book called The Listening Book, and it's actually the imprint that it's on is like one of the publishers where I've read a lot of titles about Buddhism and things like that. And like, I didn't actually know that until I received the book, and I was like, "Whoa, this is on the Shambhala Press! No way! Okay." And some of those.
I've read that book.
Oh, really?
I have, yes.
Oh,
it was
what's
one of the few music books that is not. It's hoity-toity in a way, but it's completely approachable.
Yeah.
And you can make it your own. And they ask you to do things, and they're fun to do. Like they'll be like, I think this is the same book where part of it says. Because I think there's a trio of books that are from the same publisher. But this book, I think he says, like, go into a room that you think is quiet and listen and see what you can hear.
Yep.
And I was like, that was amazing, because now I do that for fun now. I think some of the exercises are actually fun.
Oh, interesting. Well, that's good. Yeah, I mean, this was, I think, maybe in the same discussion where Adam Neely recommended the Harmony book. He recommended that one. And yeah, but I mean, those things that you're describing are total mindfulness activities. They're totally meditative activities. I mean, it's John Cage 433, right? You know that thing.
I don't.
Oh, dude. Okay, so John Cage 433 is 4 minutes and 33 seconds. It's a piece of music that is played differently every time, and the idea is that the person, it's a piano piece. The person who's playing the piano, or the pianist, I guess, walks on. So the audience is in there. Pianist walks onto the stage, lifts the lid of the piano, lifts the lid where the keyboard is, and maybe opens the lid if it's a grand piano that has a lid. And he has a timer. And when he opens the lid, he starts the timer and either sits at the piano or walks away. And the idea is that you listen to the room for 4 minutes and 33 seconds. I mean, John Cage is brilliant in that way. Like he was one of the first guys to popularize chance operations with music. Like he would drop coins onto a staff, and then just like where the coins were, he'd write the notes, like that sort of thing. He did multimedia when multimedia was not even a word yet. He would include like sounds of like broken glass or glass breaking into like a symphony and all that sort of stuff. Like, man, I saw something, probably PBS, when I was way younger, when I was a teenager. I saw something like that, and that kind of shit spoke to me immediately. I was like, wow, like that's on one end of the spectrum of music being like avant-garde, like that sort of thing appeals to me. I was just talking to somebody about how I don't understand classical music. Like I don't understand it aesthetically. I don't know how to listen to it. And by the way, if there's a prescription for like how to listen to it, like your ears are listening all the time, like you're going to prescribe how to listen to classical music, and it involves a bunch of people whose backs are really stiff and sitting in a particular way. No way, I'm out. I'm out. Give me Black Flag anytime. I'm out. Like that.
The closest I ever got to classical music, almost was a slippery slope, was Hooked on Bach.
Yeah.
Because I really liked the sounds of synths all my life, and so my father, I think, turned me on to that.
Oh yeah, of course. Okay, that's a classic one. So
I think it's Wendy Carl. Yeah, I think she's
Wendy Carlos. Yeah, totally.
So yeah, that was like, I started to hear, and like the Clockwork Orange soundtrack was mostly her and that. And so I needed something though. I couldn't just listen to regular classic music. I needed something in it to be wacky. And but then when he took that out, it didn't resonate with me. I know my father like happily was really excited to take me to a Rachmaninoff concert, and I was asleep and snoring. By the end, I was like an embarrassment. And so
I did that once here too. A friend of mine like had season tickets to the Seattle Symphony or something, and I don't even remember what it was. I wanted to go, and it was like they had a new auditorium, and I was really curious about that, and blah blah blah. And I went, and I was asleep. But the other thing was, so were the other season ticket holders. I was like, what is the point of this? Like, this seems like a really odd and expensive flex for everybody here. I'm just like, I'm out. Like, again, I'm out. Just doesn't interest me. I also took a music theory class as an elective at RPI.
Really?
Like my senior year. Yeah, do you remember that Troy had the Troy Music Hall? Do you remember that at all?
Yeah.
It's like I think it's the oldest music hall or something in the US, and it's in its original form. Like they didn't change the paint, they didn't change the chairs in it, like nothing. Like to preserve its acoustics, that there's something in particular about its acoustics that is rather perfect, according to a lot of standards. And we had to go. So this person was, I can't remember what her day job was, because I think she was just an adjunct there. There wasn't a big music department there, as you may remember. And I took that class, and it was like about reading, and then it was about intervals and about how to listen and stuff like that. And we had, if it was weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly, I don't know, but like go to a concert and listen and then write about it. And I remember I did a bunch of those things, and just found there were some things that were cool. There was a bunch of like 20th century stuff. I really wish I could remember what they were. If I really, really think about it, I may even still have the papers that I wrote about it somewhere here at home. But I didn't dig that stuff at all. And then I also one month turned in a paper about a jazz performance that I went to. She just handed it back to me. She's like, "Jazz is not music." I'm like, wow.
Whoa.
Yeah. And like a week later, I was like, I need to change this class to pass fail. Like, joking me, lady. Yeah, she was a snob, man, and like shit like that turns me off. I'm out. I'm interested in weird stuff. Like I said, I like Zappa an awful lot. That's a very, very acquired taste for nearly everybody. But he likes Edgar Varese and those types of people, which I sort of enjoy that stuff. And John,
I only took one music class at RPI. It was in their eye-ear department. It was like interactive something. I don't know what the acronym was for, but it was clever because it had the word ear in it. And they did like all this kind of modern or pop art. I don't know what the deal was, but I did a video art class with Venn. And we did some kind of video to Call of Cthulhu. As our main project.
That's so weird. Maybe we did discuss that. That like rings a little bell.
Well, the weird thing, so everyone had to do a project, and one of the guys there always had this air of that he was better than it. He was the actual artist, and all of the rest of us were just engineering people.
He was a student also?
I don't know what his deal was, but I do remember one thing. I do remember that his final project was porn. Period. There was nothing. Everyone presented their video project, and this was just porn. I could not believe it. It was him and his wife or girlfriend or something, and his short member, and they were doing it, and he was pointing the camera down at himself and his wife, and I was just like, "This is not happening. Like, what the hell is this?" I was pretty prude, and I didn't. It wasn't even like, I don't think it was good by anybody's standards, but it was just like so disturbing.
Well, maybe he's the John Cage of Pornhub, like that kind of thing. could draw a terrible analogy and a very awkward one.
I think he's more likely fucking an intern for somebody. I don't know if he ever did anything good.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, that's funny. But yeah, those kinds of things you're like, whoa. And I probably at the time, if I had been in that class and like that sort of thing happened, I probably would have been okay. I like get the whatever. I mean, avant-garde is overused, but whatever you would call it, outsider or whatever these variations on avant-garde are. Like
I just remember I did give my you had the opportunity to give a critique,
yeah,
and I did give my critique. I was like, "Is out of focus? You couldn't hear anything." It
yeah,
was like all these very technical things without addressing the elephant in the room.
yeah,
I
yeah,
just wanted to let him know it just wasn't good. It's like I'm going to be avant-garde so I can get an A in this class. I'm
yeah.
pretty sure the teacher didn't fall for it either.
That's good, and that's like pre-political correctness.
Oh
Everybody
yeah,
in there. Super interesting.
it was pre-internet.
Yeah. Oh, geez. And then, like, I mean, I'm sure you've read that. Like years later, they have like a world-renowned multimedia like thing happening there. Like, it's kind of interesting. But I don't know. Actually, I don't know if it had any staying power. I remember reading about it someplace in a magazine that was not by the school itself. I was like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, it's those guys. That's crazy. Like, I thought it was kind of interesting, like how it had changed like immediately for those guys, which is good. Hopefully, it's working out.
So you had your are you going to do more with the set up the Ableton projects this week? Are you still working towards that? Or are you going to?
I feel like I did have. I mean, it's probably overstating it to call a breakthrough, but one of them is like, all right, what's the purpose of this? It's not helping my ear. Oh, and then the other thing I also said was like, hey, I'm actually going to play this. This one, I'm going to play one of the modes based on just the C major scale, and I know it's white notes, and I suck at piano, but that's all right. I'm just going to play that scale over and over in the background, and then like try to improvise over it, like try to do something that is very, you know, whatever, like do A minor over it, right? Because that's the parallel minor or the relative minor, whatever they call it. And actually, that part was good. Like I thought that was super useful in that I could find the notes, and then once I played around with that sort of thing, like knowing that the home point would be the A or the A minor chord, I could mess around with that. Like for me, I think we talked about something like, hey, if I can set up the drums the way I want, I can sit down and it'll sound like me when I start playing.
Yeah.
That kind of like I'm comfortable with that. I'm comfortable with the concept of improvising. I think that's an essential part of learning any instrument. And yeah, I improvise terribly a lot of times, but then other times like it sounds like me and it feels like me and it's like fun and engaging and whatever. And that exercise was useful, and I would not have been able to do that exercise if I didn't program those few things in and just try to mess around with it. So I did find some benefit to that, and I'm wondering if that like is sort of a cheat about, because in this book it's talking about things at like a very like macro sort of level. It's talking about harmony like from a pretty zoomed out perspective. If I'm looking at uh, a sheet of sheet music, I'm looking at the like the conductor's book, right, of in front of an orchestra. I'm looking at it like I'd be able to pick out some details that I know that I would want to hear as I'm practicing with the orchestra or whatever. But there's no like, hey, this is how you work on melody. Like these accompaniments work really well, and when there's a melody, this sort of thing works well underneath it or on top. But like, what do you do to come up with a melody? And it's like, sure. Again, do you hunt and peck? Do you like just mess around with something? And like a couple of the fragments on my hard drive were like, hey, I got this plugin and it has like a bunch of like loops, and then you can affect them somehow. And some of them are instrumental, some of them are just environmental clicks and crackles and this or that or the other thing. And then things like I feel like because I feel like my ear is good, like things sort of naturally come to me and I can like do that sort of thing. And that's an improvisation as it were. But I mean, maybe for me, all things start that way. You know, we've talked about the guys who just take a blank piece of paper and go, okay, I'm going to write like a blah, blah, blah in whatever key. And then they write it without ever listening to it. Or maybe they certainly have to hear it in their head, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Or maybe you just write something obeying all the rules, you modulate this way and you come up and down and you do this or that or the other thing, and then who knows?
Yeah.
But again, that's the subtlety, and those are the like little bits that like sort of fill in and then connect to each other the more you do it or the more you try it out. So I thought that was a worthwhile exercise. And I'm just wondering where that might take me. Yeah. And then I'm also like messing around with like some guitar pedals. I feel like I got a handful of cool effects pedals that I actually haven't used yet, that I just want to also mess around with those a little bit. I play very little guitar, and if I do, I play like in an open tuning or something, like, and mess around with that.
What kind of guitar do you have?
I actually have an Epiphone SG. Like I have,
Okay.
and I've had that for years, and like I picked it up years ago, and it's like the most comfortable guitar that feels awesome in my hands. And like I've tuned it like very, very low, B or B flat, and tuned it up to normal tuning and whatever, and it just feels good in my hands. I also have I have a Telecaster as well that also feels good in my hands. Like the neck on this Telecaster is great. And I think I've spent way too much money for a guy who does not play guitar. But they
So you
feel
bought
good.
2 guitars?
Yeah, I mean, I have a bass. I have an acoustic guitar also. Like
Okay.
I mess around with these things once in a while.
I'm just trying to get a sense, because that's my world, right? So I want a sense of who I'm talking to. I'm from the guitar spectrum. I don't think you had any guitars back in college.
Oh no, I actually, I bought a bass like maybe when I was a senior, and then I started to just kind of get interested in that sort of thing. Yep.
What are the pedals that are you using,
These
or you want to use?
They're made by this company called Meris, Meri.
Oh yes, I know them.
Okay, yeah. So I got the Hydra, which is this the delay pedal? No, this is the one that you play. It does pitch tracking. So like this is one of those pedals where you can't play a bad note apparently, and it actually transposes in the pedal, and you can choose a 3-part harmony. Yeah. I mean, honestly though, I'm dying to just like play a drum machine through this and see what it sounds like. Like I love that sort of shit. I also got the Autobit Junior, which is like a slicer, dicer, and kind of randomizer pedal. Again, dying to play a drum machine through it. I saw a demo of somebody playing techno through it, and I really liked it. And what's the other one? Let me just see. Oh yeah, the Polymoon, and the Polymoon I think is a delay pedal. Yeah, and one of my like favorite kind of ambient-ish guitar players, Noveller, Sarah. Her name is Sarah Lipstate, I think. Quite cool, and she really was. I saw a demo of her using the Polymoon. I thought it was quite nice. But that company seems really nice.
They're really great.
Yeah, seems like well engineered and pretty user friendly. Like the manuals are like 1 page, and they're just like, yeah, man, go for it.
Mm-hmm. You have an amp?
Yeah, I have a deluxe reverb.
Yeah.
I saw who did I see? It wasn't Mazzy Star, but it was the singer, Hope Sandoval. She had a band called after the 2 Mazzy Star records that blew up in the early 90s. She had a band called Hope Sandoval and the Warm Intentions, and I went to see them live at a small place in Seattle, and like, yeah, both guitar players were using deluxe reverbs. I was like, all right, got to try one of those. I got the extra scratch. I'm gonna get one. It's like, yeah, it's such a beautiful amp, and like you said, standard. It's classic sound. It's like super interesting. But also, you should know that like years later, as I was just kind of working like as a musician for hire, a photographer for hire, blah blah blah. After I left tech, I had an instrument and gear rental, like backlining sort of service that I was doing with a few guys here in Seattle. So I have like all kinds of things. I have like a couple 4x12s. I have a Sun Model T head. Like I've got a bunch of things. Some bass amps, blah blah blah. I have like a small PA, yada yada. So those things have hung around. I'm thinking about selling some of them off because I don't use them, but these things like stick around. And I'd rented them out. I don't do it anymore, but I'd rented them out and probably gotten them paid off that way, which is quite nice. But
right.
Yeah. So and like, yeah, I mean, a deluxe reverb is something everybody's always asking for when they come into town. they're pretty delicate to travel around with, but if you can rent it in the town that you're in, go for it. But yeah, it has simple, beautiful sound.
Sounds like you're very prepped to start your Kiss cover band anytime.
Yeah, now that I watch my man on YouTube, we'll do those. It was like he had like such a super specific thing. It was like 3 Ace licks from 1977 or something that I thought was really great. And that dude, I guess, used to write for Guitar Player or Guitar Magazine or something. And
really?
his videos his videos are awesome. He's just like cool stoner dude who like really, really knows some shit about guitar. He's great.
So much better than any of the guys who have millions of viewers. And he has 30,000 or something. He's really good. I really enjoyed it. I didn't know if you were going to bring up his videos today. I was ready to talk about it. I don't know if you still have time to, or if we want to save that. But it was, I think, really interesting in the context of what we're doing here, because this guy, what do you remember his name?
No, but I'll look it up so we can actually say it for sure.
Yeah,
it might be Mark something.
It's not far from my
Ace 1977 is what I will look for. Yep, 3 Ace Frehley licks from 1977. His channel is called Late Night Lessons, but what is his name? Oh, David Brewster.
Okay.
Yeah, David Brewster.
Yeah, David Brewster's great. In fact, his video is playing in the background here. I hope you didn't hear that. And he focused in on Ace's playing, and he talked about Kiss. So he's kind of doing a melodic overview of Kiss, and immediately gravitated to Ace, which makes him a hero in my book, because that is everything he said was just exactly what I've always felt, and he's definitely a big Ace Frehley fan over the other guys. And but what was interesting is that when you first sent me a video called "The Chords of Kiss."
Yeah.
When I thought of the chords of Kiss, I actually didn't think of Ace. I think of him as the riffs of Kiss and the lead and the guts, the kick acidness of Kiss. When I think of the chords of Kiss, I definitely think of Paul Stanley.
Think of the Star Child.
Yeah. And so I was really surprised that he didn't, and I didn't yet look on YouTube if they had anybody who's done like an overview of Paul Stanley, but I thought that might be kind of a fun thing to do. Like, obviously I love Ace and I could talk about him forever. And did you know that I had a chance to talk? I was on an e-zine, and they asked me if I wanted to interview a member of Kiss.
Yeah.
Did I tell you that story?
Yeah, where you met Ace.
No, not where I met Ace.
No.
So this was after Ace left the band, and I was working for American Recordings in some technical capacity, and they said, "Hey, we're going to interview Gene Simmons. Do you want to be the interviewer? We don't know anything about Kiss. Why don't you interview them?"
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, okay. So I prepared all these questions for Gene Simmons, and I was going to like really grill him on why he's such a dick and everything. And so I got it was the time I was supposed to wait for a phone call. I got the phone call, and I said, "That was my." I said, "Yeah. Oh, this is Paul Stanley from Kiss." I'm like, "Oh, I was expecting Gene Simmons to call me." And Paul says, "Well, today is your lucky day."
That is awesome. Did you record it at all?
No, I didn't record. I wish I had. This is like before, like there was tons of technology and stuff.
Yeah. Oh my God, that's so good.
So he completely disarmed me from like moment one. Like I was laughing with him, and he was like talking and stuff and everything. And I asked some of them the same questions, but obviously he's Paul Stanley. He's a professional entertainer, and he's heard all these questions before, and he just was able to play me and turn my questions around and stuff. I asked him, why don't you want Ace in the band anymore? Like, it's all part of the same family and all these, like he just, he was a really engaging person to talk to, actually. So I didn't even feel like necessarily, because I actually had met Ace earlier, which you do remember, and Ace was not fun to talk to or interesting. So I was pretty much, set straight in a sense from like who was the professional here. Like, obviously, I still love Ace. I think he's the heart of Kiss, but I think there's more to Paul. And I thought one of the fun things I could try to do on this channel between you and I is explore things about Kiss that I don't already know really well, and things like, why did that work? Like, so everyone can, I think, David Brewster kind of went for the easy, what's it called, the low hanging fruit by explaining why Kiss is cool, by explaining what Ace does that's cool. But like, I think there's something to be said for Paul, and I don't know.
It's interesting that you say that about that. Like, here's stuff that's cool about Kiss. Let's talk about Ace. Like,
yeah, it's
so
easy.
I didn't get that until you mentioned that. I mean, for me, it's natural. I'm like, hell yeah, I want to know what the spaceman's doing. Like, let's go. But at the same time, the chords of Kiss, I expected, or not expected, but I wanted, because we talked about this last time too, is Gene's bass lines. That's what I really wanted. And like, like, you didn't talk about Gene at all, which makes Gene furious, I'm sure. It's trying to get the video taken down. But that's okay. But yeah, keep going. But I thought that's an interesting take.
Well, we brought up Duran Duran in the past. One of the things that I always liked about Duran Duran and some Blondie songs too is that they have these notes that don't fit in the key. And if there are notes that don't fit in the key, they come from Gene or Paul. I'm sorry, Gene or Ace, because Gene is playing the bass and he's doing all these walking bass lines that are walking through all the scales chromatically and adding a lot of groove to these songs. The chords are mostly fifths. They don't even have like seventh flavors to them. They're very much riff oriented. And then Ace does throw in, through I think happy accidents with his solos, he throws in some blue notes. He's a bluesy guitarist. But with Gene, it's much more deliberate. Like, he's definitely choosing to play that bass line in that way, because he knows something about what he wants to accomplish within his role in the band. I don't think
it's his obsession with the Beatles coming through. Like, I think,
totally. Yeah, Paul Stanley is a great bassist. But Gene's not. He's defining the inversions of the chords of Kiss. So I think that would have been something for him to mention there. But I have one thing I can say about Paul. And it's kind of a secret thing that I like. I'm always amazed that I always know it's when he's singing. Something he's doing with his voice and with his background vocals that he does, it's more versions of him that he multi-tracks. You always know when it's Paul Stanley singing. Like, I can tell his voice so easily, and even on brand new albums or whatever. Like, he's a very distinctive guy. And I want to try to play you a couple of phrases from him.
Yeah, sure.
What I want to do is I want to, like, next week, I want to see if I can have deciphered what makes this sound like Paul Stanley. All right, so here
are you really going to play Crazy Nights, dude? Come on.
I'm not going to play all of Crazy Nights. I'm going to play you. Okay, so I don't know how to introduce this, but I think Paul Stanley has a distinctive sound. I don't like anything that he's done necessarily after the 80s, but I have a few things where you just know that that's his thing that he learned. And then I was wondering, like, when they talked about Ace, they talk about his technique, and then all these people who stole his technique and used it and brought it, used it in their own things, like the guy from forget the bands that were listed there, but there was a bunch of people Ace influenced.
Oh yeah. He had that like little slide in there. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, but no, Paul didn't, like, nobody else sounds like this except one person, and I've thrown in a clip of that person at the end too. So this is
Well, let's go back to the slide for a second, just to be clear. That slide is about Ace's guitar playing, not his singing.
Of course.
The slide about singing is empty.
It's got my name in it.
Yeah, totally. It's got.
So here you go. Here's 4 songs that sound totally like Paul Stanley to me.
I want to get away. I want to fly away. Yeah.
So there's something about the harmony that's happening. And that's why specifically I'm bringing it up here because we're talking about music theory. So that you hear Paul Stanley sing, but then there's this thing that happens when he overdubs himself to make these chords. Yeah. And especially in Tears and Falling and Save Your Love, they sound kind of jazzy, or they sound kind of bad. They don't sound very rock and roll. I never really liked them, but I always knew it was Paul Stanley. So I want to learn, what is that chord or what is that technique that I'm hearing that's so distinctly Paul?
What do they call it? I like, especially in Save Your Love. It's that thing where you're like singing a chord, but you actually try to keep it's so that if you have a bunch of singers and you're changing the chords, that's everybody is not changing the notes to the next chord. Like if the next chord has something in common with the previous chord, you pick one or two voices to play that same note that stays in the chord and let less of the people modulate. Whatever the heck that's called. I have a friend of mine who's a voice teacher. Like there's a term for when you're a PhD student and you did everything except write your thesis. Like that's where she's at. Okay. That's where she left it off, but she's also a professional singer. And we've been talking about that, but she would know it. But there's a name for that. It's not voice leading, but there's a name for that technique where you keep one or more of the voices, and it doesn't have to be people. It could be anything. It could be cellos or something.
Do you think that's all I'm going to find, though?
I feel like it is, because especially in Save Your Love, he's singing more or less the same note, and Gene is the one who's doing the changing. Because I think so. It's interesting. I've been thinking about it as we're talking about it. I feel like Gene does a lot of the falsetto sort of stuff, and Paul does the mid-range stuff. And Ace just talks. He doesn't do much. Like his singing is more or less talking. Yeah, exactly. The T is silent. But he. That's what I think is the deal with their vocals, and I think Paul has a very like back of the throat kind of mid-range thing, where Gene, when he actually sings, not does the like, 'cause I'm the doctor, not that stuff, but like when he's singing, I think he usually does a lot of the falsetto stuff.
Interesting.
And also, when you watch, you've seen the Winterland show, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Ace got the pizza box on. It's pretty good.
I love that costume. Come on.
It looks like a fucking pizza box. Dude. It's so good.
It kills me every time you say that.
I
remember why we stopped talking now. It was a pizza box comment.
But if you watch that one and like, they're really real. That's prior to a live one, right? It's got to be, I think.
Oh yeah.
Okay. So they're really going for it. But you watch Gene, and he's doing so much vibrato in his like backing vocals that his head is like trembling. Like watch those things, man. Like Watching You, and then also and I'm trying, baby, trying not to. What song is that's also Watching You, isn't it? You don't really know. You don't really know. You don't really. Oh no, yeah, it is Watching You. Totally. Yeah, watch that in particular. Just take that as your homework and watch it. Like his vibrato and his like, yeah, it's super interesting. Like Gene is fucking singing in that performance. Later on and lately, he doesn't sing at all. He does that I'm the doctor thing. It's like not. Although, I mean, bro, my favorite Kiss song of all time, we've talked about this before, is Almost Human. And like, that's a Gene vocal song. And he's not singing. He's doing that weird demon voice thing.
Yeah.
Which I love. And that's actually my favorite Kiss guitar solo of all time as well. Man, we could turn this into the Kiss fanboy podcast.
Yeah, I don't think we need to do that. But
yeah, except you can't play Crazy Nights during that. I'm sorry. You can't play stuff from that.
I was just looking for, and I actually had to go to later songs because it comes from like when we talk about like developing our own style and like having a style. Kiss early days, if you listen to those albums, they're pretty diversely they're kind of crapshoots in a way too. It's not like every song sounds like Kiss. Like Metallica,
Yeah.
Kill 'Em All, already they had them as their sound, but Kiss, they were all over the place. They're doing like weird stuff for quite a while, and it's only by the time when they took off the makeup, they had their songs, their styles, their tricks, and so that's why the Crazy Nights. That's why the Tears Are Falling. I'm trying to figure out what that Paul Stanley trick is.
Yeah, the other thing that that comes to mind where like he's harmonizing with himself maybe is in the sort of improvising part in I Was Made for Loving You, of course, where he's actually singing falsetto with himself. Like check that one out, like that, because I think that one takes him out of the mid-range and it sounds a lot different.
I don't know if I want to find him sounding different, because actually I don't know that his
well, I mean, when he
falsetto there sounds like him.
Yeah, it does sound like him. You're saying it actually honors the same thing that you're talking about.
I don't know if it sounds like Paul.
Okay.
It's a canonical song, so we were associated with him, but I don't know if I would hear outside of that context if I would. It's like, oh, that's his thing. That's the trick that he uses a lot.
But I'm saying that he sings in the normal Paul register, and then he actually goes into the falsetto, and you're like, that's just a dude doing falsetto. Maybe it's not. That's the kind of thing I'm saying, is that he actually changes like along with himself, and part of it is the Paul thing in the mid range.
Okay.
When he goes to falsetto, you maybe notice that it's not very, very Paul-like or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's just something that occurred to me because I don't know anything about the Kiss catalog. But the other thing you're saying is like those early records happen when a band tunes to E flat when nobody's doing that, and their only reference is like the Beatles. But I mean, Metallica had like Budgie and all of those like they had Killing Joke. They had all these bands that were doing heavy-ish things already, if not only for just maybe a few years. I mean, that's the spot that Kiss plays in like the pantheon of guitar-based rock about girls and partying. I mean, there it is. Like that band, like they were nobody was doing. I mean, who did you have? New York Dolls, right? They were flirting with the look. Even Lou Reed and Velvet Underground and that sort of stuff was flirting with weird stuff like that. But it's funny because you hear Paul Stanley like totally ragging on, speaking of Blondie, like the whole scene that Blondie was a part of, that like New York CBGB sort of thing. He specifically calls out television. Like, do you listen to those guys at all?
Yes, I did. Yeah. I mean, I know I even know the interview you're talking about.
Yeah, totally. Like, it's like, oh man, but like television still sounds good. And he's like, they went nowhere, dude. It's like, no way. That guy, like whatever spun off from what dude was doing. Is that Richard Hell's band? Was he the main guy in that band?
I don't know any of the names.
Can't remember. But like when I listened to Marquee Moon, right? That record is awesome. It sounds so good. And you know that it spawned tons of other things like Sonic Youth and all those other things that I enjoy. Speaking of atonal. But yeah, it's like so funny that he picks that one band. I'm like, dude, that band's great. I mean, yeah, he can't tread on Blondie for sure, but I'm like, television's pretty rad. And they sort of did go somewhere. I don't know.
Yeah, he very explicitly says like sometimes bands don't make it because they're not good, and he talks about them. He really laid into them quite hard.
Yeah, it's very strange that like a very peculiar. I mean, maybe a lot of musicians like him. Who knows? But like that stuff can't be denied. Paul, come on.
And Paul Stanley says, "Well, our music made us more money than the other guys, so I can tell you that we're better than the other people."
Yeah, it's like
Trump thing, it's not.
Yeah, these are all variations on like histories written by the winner kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, am I really gonna like listen to Kiss vocal harmonies as like a serious pursuit? Maybe.
I like it in that it should be easy. Like it shouldn't be difficult because we all know it's simple, right?
Yeah.
So it's got to be somewhere to start. Like maybe you even start simpler, but I don't want to start like with the fucking Ramones or somebody who's even more raw. Like at least Kiss has a certain level of production where I know the I can listen to the things carefully and it'll be clear.
Yeah.
I don't want to, if I want to go even simpler, then, then I might actually have to be better to hear it. But this is very produced, very tuned. They do a million takes until it sounds good. I should be able to tell you that he's all the voices that he's singing adds up to a dominant seventh or something like that. I want to be able to say that.
Yeah, whether he knows it or not. Yeah.
He knows that I think he must know that when he's got that Paul sound.
Yeah.
He's got the ear.
Yeah.